Welcome to Peace is a Choice, the podcast where we explore how conscious awareness can help us cultivate inner peace and transform our lives. I'm Natasha Wallace, and in each episode, we'll hear from guests about their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced, and how they've found greater levels of peace in their lives and positively impacted the lives of others. Today, I'm joined by the fabulous Charlotte Neal, Head of Community Connections at Reward Gateway Edenred. Charlotte plays a pivotal role in connecting HR people together. Her story is nothing short of inspiring, full of personal growth, resilience, and hope. Charlotte's journey is a reminder that sometimes the places where we work can do far more than just provide a job. Arguably, they should provide more than just providing a job. In Charlotte's case, her employer saved her life. Charlotte, welcome to Peace is a Choice.
Thank you so much for having me, Natasha. It's a pleasure.
So just a bit of a throwback to us meeting originally, which was a few months ago. We met at Georgina Kelly's event, one of her Women in HR networking events, which are always great. I don't know if you've been to any since we went to that one.
Yeah, I'm actually on the board for the Women in HR network, so it's really, it's really nice to go to these events. And I remember you were speaking on a panel, and every time you spoke, I just was like, okay, I'm making friends with you immediately.
I tell you what, though, that's like an ode to authenticity, because back in the day, like when I was an HR director many years ago, I can remember doing talks, and I always felt like I was masking. I wouldn't have been as bold. But actually, it's a nice segue into your story, because actually you're very honest about your story, and it's evolved in a powerful way. And you went from being a former journalist for the Mirror to sales and marketing. Now you're head of community connections at Reward Gateway Edenred. So I think, first of all, let's talk about what prompted that direction, and then I'm quite keen, obviously, to talk about why your current employer were just so amazing.
Yeah, and just to caveat, I know saying that they saved my life is really dramatic. We were speaking before we were recording this. It's not as literal as, they pulled me from a burning building, saved my life, but the trajectory of where my life was headed was very much changed, altered for the better, and so positively by them. But what prompted the change was, so I trained in university to be a journalist, and by the time I'd finished my degree, the job that I had trained for had evolved so much that it actually got to a point where it wasn't really what I wanted anymore. But I still pushed for it because it was my dream, and I grew up watching women on TV shows being amazing journalists. Carrie Bradshaw, kind of fell in love with the idea of that. But the reality was very different, and I would never speak badly of my time as a journalist because it was an amazing experience, and I worked on some great papers with some amazing people. However, for me, I really like people. And I think as someone who is very empathetic and really likes people, it's quite difficult to be a journalist and write stories about hate and war and, politics and everything else. And I really struggled with that. I think that I am a bit of a sponge. So I soaked up a lot of the emotion that came with all of those stories. And I really felt it. When I was on the Mirror, it would be very normal in a shift to write 12 to 15 stories, and not one of them would be positive. I was the editor of an online site called Get West London, and the day that Grenfell Tower happened, I was on shift, and I had to send my reporters to Grenfell Tower, and I was getting goosebumps talking about it now. Like, it has stayed with me to this day. And I remember at the end of the day, I came out of the office and I sat in my car and I sobbed for an hour straight. And I think for me, that was it was too much. Like, I couldn't operate in that world because it's just not who I am as a person. I found that really challenging. I wasn't at the Mirror for a very long time. I was only there for 5 months, and I ended up getting really poorly. I was off sick for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, quite a long time, with what I now know was a very intense depressive bipolar episode. And during that time, I decided that I just couldn't do it anymore. So my ex-partner actually works for a company where Reward Gateway were a client. And he said, you should take a look. And I thought, what have I got to lose? My dad's in sales. My granddad was in sales. I'll give it a go and see what happens. And I applied completely on a whim. Of the interviewing panel, 2 of them said no, and 1 of them saw something in me. And I'm forever grateful. Tony, you know who you are. You're absolute legend.
I have to ask, when you work on a paper like The Mirror, Are they pushing you to write negative stories, or is there just so much negativity that there's nothing else to write about?
When I was at uni, they actually train you about what creates a good news story, and it basically is playing on your fight or flight response. And what makes a good story or an attention grabbing story is the drama. So you can write positive news stories all you want. I actually did write a positive news story. I asked to write one and they allowed me to write it. It got no traffic, nothing. It's the same as all papers, right? They're funded by advertising now because nobody's really buying the papers anymore. And in order to get the advertising revenue, they need to generate clicks. And in order to generate clicks, they need attention grabbing headlines. And that's kind of how it happens. So they don't push necessarily. It's just that they know what is going to get the revenue.
Well, it's funny actually because it links through to something I've been thinking about. So I work at the epicenter of leadership performance and well-being, and also, in brackets, and the mitigation of burnout risk. So I could go two ways with my messaging. I could go all out on leadership performance, optimizing leadership performance, fulfilling your potential as a leader, being the best you could possibly be, making sure you sustain your energy, and that could be all of my messaging. Or I could go down the route of there's a significant proportion of leaders burning out. The majority of leaders are exhausted. It's now become a really significant business risk. And all of the work that I do and my specialism and my model and the psychometric I've developed is all orientated towards identifying burnout risk. And I've been like flip-flopping between, do I go for the burnout message, which is playing on that fight or flight? A leader will see that and be like, oh yeah, I think I might be burning out, and then I've hooked them.
Yeah.
Or do I go with, you're a great leader, let's make you even better, and go with that? I've really struggled. What's your take on it?
Option number 2, the burnout one, because you can weave your happy flavour throughout the messaging, but it's like an upside down triangle, like any news story is. You need to get all the best information here, which is how can I help you? What's your return on investment going to be? What's the risk that I'm addressing? And then get to the point, which is, and out of this, you will also become a better leader. I personally would go the burnout route, only because my sales hat also tells me that if you can show what return on investment you're giving people from the program, probably more likely to get bookings.
I haven't really had to think about my message for years and years and years because the work has just been flowing in. I've been really, really fortunate. But I'm at a sort of inflection point where I want to get a bit clearer about the audience that I work with and what it is I'm delivering. We've never been under so much pressure as coaches and consultants, or anybody really who's selling something, to get very, very clear about what the value is. Morally, I don't want to take advantage of people's fear, but the world seems to be set up to do that.
You're not taking advantage of their fear, you're giving them something to aid it, to help it. I started an Instagram account for people with fibromyalgia, and I got to nearly 10,000 followers on there, and I was being approached by brands all the time asking to advertise, and I said no to every single one of them because I didn't want to make money on people's fear or on people's misery. So I totally get where you're coming from, because it's that awkward junction of oh, but am I capitalizing on your pain here? But actually, if you reframe that in your mind and think about it as, well, no, I'm giving you the tools to make it better for yourself, and actually I'm in a fortunate position to do that.
Actually, let's go back to the fibromyalgia, because that, I think, is quite a useful thing to talk about, because it takes us up to the current day in terms of your whole experience of thinking you had fibromyalgia.
What happened was I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia in 2019. So for people who don't know, fibromyalgia is a chronic pain and fatigue condition. I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's what people are told they have when medical professionals can't really figure out what's wrong with you. So I thought I had it up until March of this year. It actually turned out that I have something called hip dysplasia, which means my hip sockets are too shallow. I was born with a deformed pelvis. I had surgery in July to correct it on the right-hand side. And honestly, the change has been wild. The amount of my symptoms that have just disappeared overnight is insane. But yeah, I did believe that I had it for a really long time.
Well, and set up a social following for other people who were suffering with it. I mean, what was that journey like? Because that must have been a bit surreal, to be like an ambassador for people with fibromyalgia, and you were really trying to help them. And then it turns out you had this other condition. What was that experience like?
I'm going to be honest, I'm still grappling with it now, because it's very recent that this has happened. But the reason I started the account was because the day I was diagnosed, all I could find online was negativity, and I didn't want other people to feel as afraid as I felt that day, because I kept seeing the word like incurable or chronic, and that really freaked me out. So I thought, well, I'm going to start this account kind of as a diary, but also so that if anyone else finds it and they're in the same boat, they can see that I'm just like a normal person living with this, and try my best. What it's been like going from having it and collecting this following and then not having it, it's been quite challenging to grapple with, because it's been a huge part of my identity for such a long time. And, for the best part of nearly 6 years, I posted on that account every single day. I was getting up to 50 messages a day from people. I held in-person community meetups. I held video calls for people. I've got a WhatsApp community. So I'm still connected with everyone there. And I think for me, like, my want to support people doesn't stop with the fact that I no longer carry that diagnosis, because for 6 years I did. So I can still relate to it. But I think there's a really important message that people need to understand, which is that fibromyalgia seems to get misdiagnosed a lot. And I think the new message that I'm sort of projecting on the account is that don't be afraid to keep asking questions and getting to the bottom of what's going on with your health. And I think that people really struggle to advocate for themselves, and being able to be in a position where I can give people the knowledge and the tools and share my experience so that they can go and do that is a really special thing.
And I'm sure you did so much good work, over those years of running that community anyway, regardless of whether you had it or not.
It's a really tough thing to do, because by nature, people with fibromyalgia are quite poorly people. So getting people together was quite challenging, to be honest. It didn't always go the way that I expected. I put on a picnic and one person came. Connected with her, we're really good mates. She actually, by chance, lives down the road from me, which is weird. It's funny, the world is quite small, I think. And giving people a sense of community is so special, because it's that thing about belonging and being seen and heard and understood, and knowing that you're not the only person going through a particular experience. I went for brunch, not last weekend, the weekend before, with a girl from my page who had read all about my hip dysplasia and what's been going on with my surgery. Turns out she has the exact same collection of conditions, because it creates other issues as well, and is having the same surgery on the same side with my surgeon.
Wow, that's crazy. I think that any sort of awareness raising is important, though. I mean, I had a team member who worked for me, and after working for me for a couple of years, she then was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And I didn't know a huge amount about it, apart from when I studied neuro-linguistic programming many, many, many years ago. There was somebody in my training group who had it. She was, hugely debilitated. She was exhausted. She would struggle to get out of bed often. It was a very, very life-limiting condition. Is it sort of semi-psychological, semi-physical?
There's not a huge amount of research into it, which is a shame. It mainly affects women. It's believed that 1 in 20 people have it to some degree, but it's experienced on a spectrum. So for some, it will be quite minor, others it will be absolutely debilitating, but often it's coupled with other conditions. And there is a psychological element to it. So it's often triggered by trauma, things like childbirth, car crash, close relatives dying, things like that.
When my team member told me that she'd been diagnosed with it, I was like, oh, it sort of makes sense of some of the things that I'd seen on the run up to that, where she would get exhausted. But I think any sort of awareness raising on any of these topics, especially, when you are leading teams or leading communities or a parent, I just think all of the information that we can get about all of the diversity in the people around us is important.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I think that when people get a diagnosis, it gives them context and an understanding of, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. Here's the things that I can do. Here's what people's lived experience tells me and how I can make things better for myself. When I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2, I was, which was in April 2023, I was given mood stabilizing medication. A lot of my fibromyalgia symptoms had gone or had been really quietened down. There's a big connection between the mind and body that I think as humans we don't massively understand to the degree that we should. But a couple of book recommendations that are really good on this: When the Body Says No and The Body Keeps a Score is another one. But both books are really good. I found the latter a bit of a tough read. I found When the Body Says No a bit easier to digest. It's really all about that mind and body connection. And I think that that's why, just bringing this back to the point of employers, when an employer has a good wellbeing program in place or mental health provision in place, that mind-body connection is something that's so important. And if they can help their employees with their minds, they're actually helping far more than perhaps they realise. And that's definitely been the case for me.
Well, let's talk about that. So tell us a little bit about your Amazing employer. I mean, it's unusual for me to have somebody coming on the podcast talking about their amazing employer. So let's do it justice, and why they saved your life.
I recognise that I'm in a very privileged position to be with an employer that works in the employee benefit space, because naturally the employee benefits that we have are incredible. I guess the main thing for me, and the main points to think about, is like mental well-being, physical well-being, how that is communicated to your employees, the different benefits that you have available, and just making people understand, or giving people the tools to understand, hey, this is what mental health is and how you might be able to deal with it. So when I first joined, I was coming off the back of a really intense bipolar episode, but I didn't know it at the time. And I was incredibly anxious. And I remember my manager kind of pulling me to one side and saying, hey, you know, it's not normal to feel like that. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And she was like, well, I think it might help for you to just read this post on our internal system. And it was a blog that was part of like a mental health awareness piece, and it was all about generalized anxiety disorder. And I read it and a light bulb went off, and I thought, okay, that makes sense. And then from there I accessed psychiatric services, was diagnosed with anxiety, and I was like, oh my gosh, my whole life suddenly makes sense. But every year I have collected conditions or various things for 7 years. It's been a 7-year cycle of just complete madness. And every single step of the way, Royal Gateway Edenred has been there for me in multiple ways. I think managers are so key, and the managers that I've had during my time have been so switched on, but done it in such a casual way where they've gone, hey, maybe I'll signpost you here, or hey, have you thought about this? Or just gentle, hands off, but like supportive at the same time. And I think I've never been made to feel like a pain for being human. And I think when you recognise people's health as part of being human, and you celebrate them for who they are as a person, not just what they do for you, I think that really is the most that you can ever do. And I've been so privileged and lucky to experience that over my time. I have a wellbeing benefit. Employees can apply for money every year, which they can spend however they like, as long as it connects to wellbeing. So I've spent mine on personal training sessions to get fitter. I've spent mine on mental well-being. I've done all sorts with it. When I was in debt, I used it to help me get out of debt, like financial well-being, all sorts of stuff. They've just made me feel like a normal human in amongst the madness, and work actually then became my safe place for a while. I don't know how many people can say that. I think I'm really lucky.
Well, unfortunately, you know, if only there were more. But I mean, did it affect your performance ever?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia the summer before that, my hands they sort of seized up like this, and I couldn't really type. And I remember one of my really close friends at work saying to me, I actually thought you were going to have to leave because you couldn't do it. And I was like, no, I couldn't. I was in the sales team at the time. They gave me a bit of grace, and when I came back and was feeling well again, you know, I smashed it.
It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast on the Oxford Review, and David Wilkinson is the editor, and they basically take the latest research into all of the things that we would know about, so employee wellbeing and leadership and culture and diversity and neurodiversity and all those sorts of things, and they publish the research. I'm doing some work with a leadership team next week around neurodiversity, or the acceptance and inclusion of individual difference. So I was listening to this podcast. She was saying that we talk about inclusion and we talk about accepting people as they are. And she said that becomes quite difficult when a business is only focused on the bottom line. Because if you're only focused on efficiency and productivity, then actually it's very difficult to be tolerant for anybody who's not fully optimized all of the time. Now, arguably, the way that your manager responded to you and supported you through these difficult times meant that they weren't only focused on optimization, productivity, efficiency, etc.
Well, have you heard the phrase go slow to go fast? I think sometimes there's a balance to be had, and actually in the UK 1 in 4 people live with a chronic health condition. That's a quarter of people in the UK, and globally it's 1 in 3. The discussion needs to be health is part of being human, and we don't do that now. What we do is go, well, you're not the perfect employee. You're not the perfect robotized robot version of an employee that we're looking for. So therefore, you're not optimized. But actually, what if we flipped the script and we said, no, health is part of being human. We accept that as part of hiring humans, what happens is that from time to time, things crop up. And actually, if we support the whole person rather than just the employee, then that can lead to so much more success. I've been at Rural Gateway 7.5 years for a reason. They've supported me through some of the most difficult, challenging things in my life, but then they've also celebrated me harder than anyone else when stuff's gone right. And I think that sense of community in the workplace and understanding that people are human beings can only ever lead to better engagement and better business outcomes. It's just going about it in a slightly different way, I suppose.
How do we get the C-suite, the executive team, to take this seriously? And part of the reason for asking is I was on the judging panel for an award. I was a wellbeing judge. And this year they didn't run the wellbeing award. And it was partly because they didn't get strong enough entries for that category. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how to support wellbeing, and there can be tokenism and it can be a little bit performative, and actually we need to be able to see value for it. What do you think employers should be focused on when it comes to supporting employee wellbeing, and what's the business case for it?
I mean, it's such a huge question, so nuanced and difficult, isn't it? Because it's not a black and white subject. And I think depending on your type of organisation, that will depend on the type of wellbeing provision that you need to have in place. Because say you're a logistics company and your people are working in the freezing cold in winter, your wellbeing provision is going to be very different to a Reward Gateway that has employees sat at a desk all day. Reward Gateway has 6,000-ish clients. The majority of people I speak with are brilliant. And they do get it. I don't think for the most part that the C-suite don't understand it. I think they do. And I do think they see the value in it. I think that the pressure is just so intense to deliver results that it's not important. It's that it's just least important after everything else. And that's the thing that I think is so challenging, because how do you bring it up the agenda? So how can you quantify your people metrics to demonstrate a tangible value back to the business? So things like employee engagement, which again is hard to deliver a specific ROI on, but if you look at your engagement scores, if you look at your employee retention, if you're losing less people, what are you saving in recruitment costs per year? And there's your tangible outcome. And I think that seems to be the way that we can get through when it comes to well-being. But it's such a difficult one, because unless someone has gone through something themselves, it can be quite tricky. So I think there's an element of storytelling that's needed as well, and actual vulnerability from real people. And I think sometimes that's what's missing in business. I think we get so sort of hard-headed and focused and we want results that we don't necessarily go, okay, let's wait for a moment and let's talk about the actual human impact of the work that we're doing.
Just thinking about your manager, the way that they responded, where they said, oh, actually, you might want to read this article over here. That's pretty impressive. That I don't think there's many managers that I've worked with in my time who would be so familiar with the content that was available that they would be able to signpost something like that actually hit the nail on the head. And now, and then you ended up going on a journey to get help. Is there some sort of cultural thing where actually the managers just do know what's available to people and they're switched on?
It's a cultural thing within the business. I've had 3 separate managers while I've been at RG, and they've all done the exact same thing every time. From a communications perspective, how are you communicating with managers about how to manage effectively? How are you setting those managers up for success? Accidental managers are the worst types of managers to have, because they want to help you but don't really have the resources to do it, or the facilities. They don't know what they're doing. Whereas when you are purposeful with your management programs within an organization and actually train people on managing people, not employees, like humans, every single manager I've come across at RG would do the same. And I've heard so many stories like that. And one that I will share, actually, my current manager, Rich Belson, absolute legend, love him. When I was going through a bit of a patch, a very patchy patch, he would be like, right, you don't have to tell me what's going on. And I didn't really want to tell him because I didn't want to burden him with my woe. But he said, but just send me a number from 1 to 5. 5 being, I'm having the worst day imaginable, please help me. And if I sent a particular number, he knew, okay, not in a good place. Work needs covering. Here's what we're going to do. Let's get practical. Here's some resources. Bosh, I'll leave you to it. I'm here when you're ready. If I sent a 1, great, cool, have a great day, boom, and I carry on with what I'm doing. But there's a sense of autonomy and letting people do what's right for them as well, and trusting them that they're not going to take the mick, and that the work will be done. It's just that it might be done slightly differently for a different person depending on what their needs are. But yes, magical managers are a godsend, and I've been very lucky.
But I mean, it's also really important for those managers to be able to stay calm under pressure and be pragmatic and be flexible and not need to control everything, and to give people the benefit of the doubt. I mean, there's so many beliefs that are underpinning that sort of management style.
Absolutely. And also there will be people that take the mick, but I think innocent until proven guilty majority of the time never really fails, because you can't tar everyone with the "but what if you're taking the mick" brush just because the odd person might. There's also a piece around, like, it doesn't need to be a parental relationship where they hold your hand and say, "come with me, let's do everything together." It's more about giving people the skills and the education they need to be able to recognise stuff within themselves and then go and figure it out and come back to work feeling seen, heard, supported, but in like an adult to adult way, that they then have that connection where they're like, "oh, you really helped me there. Oh, the business has been really good to me." And then you come back and you think, "yeah, I'll stay in for another hour. I'll do that thing today, not tomorrow."
Yeah, absolutely. Seen, heard and supported. Simple thing to say, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing that I think managers often should be trained on, is how do you see, hear and support.
It'd be different from organisation to organisation as well, because sometimes managers are just the best person at that role that have been put in a management position, and it can be really difficult to then go, okay, here are the human skills that you need to do this job. And it shouldn't be about babysitting, and I can imagine that for some people it does feel that way. There's a bit of a gap there, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, in terms of like equipping managers to be able to have those human conversations.
I think often if you see and hear and support the managers, they then see, hear and support the people. For anybody who has listened to what you've been saying today and doesn't feel good, they're suffering in some way, either physically, mentally, emotionally, and they don't know what to do, what would you say?
Number one, write it down. That really helps me. Write it down and then pick one person who you feel like understands you and speak to them. That's all you have to do. I don't think that we need to make it a really complicated process, because that puts people off. I think just reaching out to one person who you know you can trust is always a helpful thing to do. But in the instance that perhaps people don't feel like they have that, contact one of the helplines. They're amazing. I think definitely not sitting on it on your own. Whatever that looks like, reaching out somewhere is always a good first step, having a conversation.
Great, fantastic, thank you. And for anybody that wants to find out more about you, or your fibromyalgia page, I don't know, but the reward gateway even read, where would they look?
So my Instagram handle is @fibromyalgia_girl. I'm not posting on there too much at the moment because I'm still figuring that stuff out, but we'll be back. You can find me on LinkedIn, Charlotte Neal, which is spelled N for November, EAL. I am writing a book on chronic sickness in the workplace. It's called The Silent Struggle, how to support chronically sick employees. So if anyone wants to speak about that, then message me on LinkedIn. I'm all ears, and thank you.
Great. Do you need to speak to anybody else for the book?
Oh,
are you looking for stories?
Yeah, I essentially want to create a handbook of here's what brilliant looks like today, and here's how you can do it better, but also give people the understanding of what the problem is. I'm open to hearing as many stories as humanly possible.
It's good that you're using your talents for good, so it's going to make a big difference in the world, so hats off. And I'm always inspired by anybody who uses pain for purpose.
Oh, I like that. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you for listening to Pieces of Choice. For any information on what we've covered in today's episode, and to connect with my guests, head to the show notes. It would be great if you could rate and review the podcast and subscribe now so you don't miss out on any future episodes.